All right, friends. So today we are talking about such a hot topic right now, which is all about going from burnout to balance, which is also the name of Jenna Herman's new book. Jenna, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Julie. I'm so happy to be back.
Yes, I'm so excited. We actually have an alum, It Starts With You podcast alum because we have had Jenna on the podcast before. We had such an amazing conversation. We had her, we were talking about going from chaos to calm, which is one of your earlier books that you had done. So really excited for our conversation today because I feel like this topic of burnout has been obviously such a hot topic for years, but highlighted. I know I've felt it and I've heard it more with my clients in recent years. So, first, I just want to do an introduction for Jenna before we dive in. So, Jenna Hermans is proof that calm can thrive amid chaos. As the co founder and COO of Be Courageous, a transformation agency, Jenna balances her professional expertise with her role as a busy mom of four. An advocate and award winning author, she empowers individuals and businesses to implement systems and strategies that reduce overwhelm and infuse joy into daily life. I love that, hearing more joy. Jenna's work has been featured in Forbes, Owl, Business Insider, and other leading publications. Her tools and teachings help high performing individuals build organized, intentional lives, fostering greater efficiency and balance. Her Benjamin Franklin award winning book, Chaos to Calm, launched in May of 2023, has become a guide for reclaiming peace in a that's my word for the year, Jenna. Reclaiming peace in a fast paced world. Her newest book, Burnout to Balance, expands on these principles, offering actionable solutions for corporate professionals to reduce stress and achieve harmony in their work and personal lives. With her signature blend of empathy, expertise, and practicality, Jenna inspires others to create lives of calm and purpose no matter how busy or chaotic they may seem. All so many words in there that I know my listeners are like nodding and nodding, like, wait, that doesn't seem possible.
Yeah, it's wild to think that's like, oh, I can have joy and peace and calm and balance when you're working full time, whether you're a solopreneur or you're a leader in an organization or an employee that's trying to make your way within the organization outside, in addition to just a home responsibilities and trying to maintain a harmonious life. But it is, I promise, I swear, I'm living proof.
I know, we were talking about that right before we hit record. Is what I love. Jen and I were just kind of catching up before we started recording, and busy mom, running businesses, four kids, all of their schedules. Like you do, first of all, you have this calm presence about you, but also, you were saying like that this deep integrity. You're so in alignment where you actually practice the things that you help people with. And so your book, so Burnout to Balance: 5 Ways to Overcome Stress and Improve Your Well-Being at Work. So, taking a deep dive into the challenges of burnout and actionable strategies to help professionals. And protect their energy. So, Jenna, what motivated you to write another book, and particularly this one on burnout?
You know what's so funny is that when the first book came out, when Chaos to Calm came out, I had some people who weren't parents, right, say, "Do you have a book for us who aren't parents?" And I was like, "Well, this actually can be for you. Yes, it's the lens of it comes from me as a parent, but it can be for anyone." But I got asked that question enough, right? And when it came to talking to organizations through Be Courageous, or my business, my husband's and my business, talking to our clients and all of that, and talking about these principles that were in Chaos to Calm, and saying, oh, we want something tangible like Chaos to Calm, but for business, so that we can, bring this into our workday and have it be more on the nose, right? Versus let me read and then create the parallels, but rather have it be very, very straightforward. Here's what you do and how you do it in this environment. And so that's kind of what stimulated writing it. And just like with Chaos to Calm, it was like, oh, when the download comes, write it down, make it happen. And so this one came out uh, in November, but I wrote it within 6 months. It was a pretty quick
I was
write.
just gonna ask you, like, how long does it take? Just out of curiosity, like how long it takes. So 6 months of that, and then it came out in November.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Ah,
because the first book, I mean, it was about a 5 year journey with that one
mm-hmm.
versus Burnout to Balance, because the framework is similar, but
Hmm.
again, that lens and execution activation is different.
So it almost sounds even like, this is going to be like it's like a toolkit for somebody to start implementing, that they could start implementing in their work. So what are some of the key things that you were hearing from people? So obviously like, hey, we want, very practical things, but from a burnout perspective, like what are you experiencing when you talk to leaders and to organizations around this topic of burnout?
Yeah, a lot of people, the thing that I hear from a lot of my clients is that it feels like everything is important, right?
Hmm.
Everything is important, and there's no space to pause, and you just have to go, go, go because there's just so much to do and not enough time to do it all.
You're in my head, you're in my conversation I just had with multiple people, Jenna. Okay.
Right. And so like that's the thing. That's the thing I hear over and over. And Julie, like you just said, that's the thing of just everything's important and there's too much to do, or not too much, but like the time to do it all, there's not enough time. And so the action, the book itself, right, and the pieces of the book take a look at, one of the exercises is actually to do a brain dump, right, of what are all the things that you need to do and that are on your mind of stuff to accomplish. And you can even add in, I need to figure out dinner later and, fold the laundry in addition to your work task lists and, right, figuring all that out. And then from there, putting it into what's called an Eisenhower matrix. I'm sure you're familiar with that, Julie, right?
Hmm.
And I can go into more detail about that. But then really it's a tool for prioritization.
Hmm.
Because when everything feels like it's a priority, then what tends to happen is that we go for the low hanging fruit first because you're like, just get it done. Just
Yep.
get it done. Let me get the quick thing done versus actually, I really should be spending my time on this other thing that is most important and is probably more urgent than something else that's quicker and easier to get done.
Hmm.
So when there's that prioritization, that's where you can get clear on what do I do first, second, third, or what do I also not do, right? What are the things that I just stop doing or that I can delegate or I can just do later,
Hmm.
right? So that's just a little nugget.
So one of the things that came up, and I'm sure you experienced this, but for the naysayers or for the people who, because I hear this, it's like, well, that sounds great in theory, Jenna, but everything's a priority, So for that person who's sitting there going, well, yeah, I can do that, but all of these are priorities, but they're priorities in different buckets of my life. What are your suggestions for that?
We dig deeper into what does that mean to you? Why is it important, right? If you accomplished it, what would happen, right? So, like, okay, for example, I'm just going to use a random one from that's not in business, but like I've been wanting to make a photo album from my daughter's bat mitzvah for
Mm-hmm.
it's been on my quote unquote priority list. Like, this is so important. We should have this. It should be in our home that anyone can look at any time. And it's been weighing on my mind as a part of that mental load for years. For years, it's been sitting there. And finally, when I did my first round, right, of this practice, of this like exercise, and I put it in a parked in my parking lot, right? I have a hard time just deleting things, so I call it
Mm-hmm.
my parking
I
lot,
love
which
that.
means I'm not going to delete you. You're just going to be put over there. And so mentally, I can feel
Mm-hmm.
comfortable and calm knowing it's not lost and gone forever, but it's there at for me to do at some point. Because truly, is it a priority? No, there are other things that are more worthy of my time
Mm-hmm.
than making this photo album, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
really not that. It's definitely not urgent and it's not that important compared to so many other things that I have
Mm-hmm.
to
I
do.
love that idea of the parking lot because I use that example like in meetings for people where they bring up ideas that were like, hey, that's not what we're focused on right now. Let's parking lot that. I love this
Mhm.
idea though of using that for our to-do lists because I think for some people it does it. They have this like attachment where like I don't want to get rid of it. I'm going to forget about it. So if you just park it, so that's a great technique, and I think that's a great reframe for people who are sitting there thinking, okay, but everything's a priority. Is digging deeper and figuring out why though. There's one of you. There's, and people will sit there and go like, okay, I have 1 hour and then I have like 100 things that I need to do. So
Yeah.
what are some of the other tips and strategies that you talk about in the book to help people when it comes to like wrapping their heads around burnout?
Yeah. So one of the things I talk about is the concept of role modeling, right? So what would you, if we were to be in a scenario where, let's say, it's that long list of to-dos, and let's say one of your employees comes to you, or a mentee comes to you and says, I have so much on my plate, I don't know where to begin, and everything feels like a priority.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do with them, right? And so let's say they give you a list, and for just for shits and giggles,
Mm-hmm.
it's 5 items, right? And they're like, I have these 5 projects I'm working on. I don't know which one to do first. They're all important. And so you turn to them and say, okay, let's work through this. What do each of these 5 things mean? And if you were to get this one done, what would that mean? And what would need to come before and after in order to make these right? And all of those questions that you would ask somebody else, now ask yourself
Mm-hmm.
those same questions, right? To be in that mentor role, to be in that role of, this is how I would want for other people to do this. Let me do that for myself now too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that role modeling, right? For even something as like taking a break during the day, right? Because burnout often is that we're not taking breaks. We're not giving ourselves recovery. We're just go, go, go. So by role modeling and showing that it's okay to get up from the desk and leave and go for a walk, or take a call and say, hey, do you mind if we have a walking call versus a Zoom call, right? So that we can move our bodies. I just need to move my body a little bit. You've now, not only are you reducing your burnout, but you're also role modeling that for others and granting them permission to do the same when they probably wouldn't have thought about that otherwise. So you're perpetuating the balance
Yeah.
by role modeling.
I love that role modeling too, because so often when I'm talking to people, or as a coach or things, we always say it's easier to help someone else with something, like in terms of they're stuck in something or they have a problem, and you're like, oh, it's just so much easier. Or when we're trying to like think creatively of titles or names for things, and they're like, well, I can help everybody else, but I have a hard time for myself. So I love that mentality of, it's almost like, I almost, and when you were talking about that, I'm like, of course they can do that for their teams to role model it, but also it's almost like pretending, like you're sitting there with your own challenge, you're pretending that you've got someone next to you, and you're like helping them through the problem, like,
Mm-hmm.
but from this lens of like, it's not your thing. I love that idea, because it's easier to help someone else fix their problem than it is to fix their
Yeah.
own.
Right? Isn't that fascinating how we feel so more well equipped to do that for
Mm-hmm.
someone else than we are for ourselves. And I find that like that happens, I do that with my clients talking about their children also in their home life, right? And so I remember, what was it? One of my clients was telling me about a problem that they were trying to consider, right? And it actually had to do with work, with their work. And I said, what would you tell your child if they came home and said, here's what I'm wrestling with, I'm not sure what to do? What would you tell them? What advice would you give them? And what would you want to see them do, right? That that would be right for them.
Mm-hmm.
And now turn that and use that for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's so much easier to put it outside.
Another thing, as you're talking, like another thing that because it comes up in my conversations with people is when somebody says like, okay, I can do these things. Like I could start prioritizing my list or setting boundaries or deciding I want to go take a walk or things, but you know, it's other people. Other people are the problem. Like they don't want me, or they keep. That's what I hear. Like they keep scheduling. No, I block Julie. I block the time on my calendar to run to the bathroom for the first time for today, or eat lunch, or take a walk. But people keep scheduling over it, so there's nothing I can do.
Mhm.
What do you? I'm assuming you are addressing that with people as well. So what do you say to them there?
Absolutely. So I tell them to have a really honest conversation, right? To have a courageous conversation with the people who are scheduling, right? With those powers that be, and say, here's what works for me and what I need in order to show up best for you and for our work together, right? When you look at my calendar, it's important that I have, these buffer times between meetings, because that's when I do my processing. That's when I get a snack, when I have a bio break, and then I can show up to the next meeting and have more energy, have more of my bandwidth with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, or like this time between 12:30 and 1:30 every day, that is protected time for me to have a break, to have lunch and to go for a walk or whatever, because then that creates the space in my mind and in my body to be able to show up back again at 1:30 and give it my all. Right? So it's actually in service of you and our business for me to have these moments. And I also recommend that you do it too, right? Try it out and see if it works, and see how it benefits you, right? Or maybe it doesn't, but just try it, because to have these little breaks during the day, you can come back refreshed, and maybe we go on a walk together, right? If we need to meet during this time, and that's a time that I like to have a moment to get outside and get some fresh air, maybe we can go outside and do that together as opposed to doing that inside. So I try to come up with creative ways to be able to talk and problem solve around that, right? And it's different for everyone, and the culture of the organization is different in how you communicate and what you feel like you can and can't say. But really, it starts with a courageous conversation, and to say that, right? And to truly say, I'd like to have a courageous conversation with you. When's a good time to share something that's really important to me, so that we can brainstorm together how to do this.
I love that too. And I think sometimes what I call them is like leaky boundaries, where people are like, okay, they're setting their boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
but then they have leaky boundaries because they'll keep letting other people take over that time, or things like that. And oftentimes, exactly what you said, what I find is it's because people aren't having the conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's definitely instances where maybe someone is having the conversations and they just don't have a great leader or culture in the organization and they're not respecting it. More often than not, what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing you say, is it's things that are left unsaid. People are just assuming that, if someone puts something over their lunch, that they can't speak up for that. They're just making those assumptions versus having the courageous conversation to say, hey, actually, this is really important to me. Here's why. And
Mm-hmm.
then once they have that conversation, if the person does it again, it's resetting that
Mm-hmm.
boundary versus letting them do it, because otherwise it just falls back in. So it has to start with having the conversation and then keeping up that boundary,
Mm-hmm.
keeping up that commitment to it, so that they understand that you mean business in the sense of like, oh, okay, and they'll start to adjust to it.
Mm-hmm. There's a concept of persistence wears down resistance. I don't know if you've heard that one before,
I
Julie.
heard it that way. I love that.
Yeah, it's so clear and clean. And what I love about it, and especially as it comes to boundaries, right, is that when you keep being persistent, right, and putting up those boundaries and saying, up, like I saw you put the thing up again at that time, like, no, I'm going to hold my boundary. I'm going to push you by 15 minutes or by an hour or cut us short or whatever it is. Um, that the resistance does disseminate, right? And it does dissipate, excuse me. It does dissipate. And there's a visual I like to use with the Grand Canyon, and how it's like a tiny little stream. Before the Grand Canyon was the Grand Canyon, it was just a little stream of water, and slowly but surely it carved right into building this massive, amazing, beautiful canyon in the desert. And it's just because of this little persistent stream that it wore down the resistance of the rocks to make
Great
this.
visual.
And
Yeah.
right? And so it's the same for us. And that can be whether that's working with another human being or trying to build habits within yourself, right? That the more consistent you are with it, right? That you lay down those tracks and you just are persistent and consistent, that it will carve a permanent state, right? For yourself.
And I love that. I mean, that persistent wears down. That's so true. And I'm thinking in my head of so many examples of that for yourself, but also then for other people. And so for those of you listening who are sitting there going like, okay, but I can only do so much as outside of myself. We're going to ask you, Jenna and Julie here are going to ask you to really critically challenge yourself to go, what else have you tried? How else have you thought about this? What other conversations do you maybe need to have?
Mm-hmm.
And what other approaches do you maybe need to take if you consistently are butting up? And I'm saying this to myself. So for those of you listening too, because we all, I think, can fall back into this habit or this rut of like all of a sudden other things starts inundating our own time and calendar. And I have to ask it because this whole word of balance, right? So your book is Burnout to Balance. And there's been so many conversations from people of like, we want work-life balance, but then, this whole like there's no such thing as balance. So then we heard the word integration. How do you define balance?
Mm-hmm. It's such a good question, Julie. Thank you for asking it. Because like it's funny that there was a concept I heard a long time ago that I resonated with it, and it was called balance is bullshit. It's like, but then I really, because it used to look like, in my mind, the way that I used to see balance was that you have two sides and you go like this, right? And you're trying to find the weight on both sides so that it can be even. And what I realized through doing my work and not just writing this book, this kind of an outcome of my new definition of balance, but rather it's more like a yin yang or a pie, right? And so there's all these different pieces of the pie. And the balance is it's actually in a totality. It's in its whole. It's a holistic thing, right? There's only one life. So work-life balance, work is a part of your life. There is no difference. You don't take off your skin suit and show up somewhere else to do work and then put it back on to go somewhere else, or like, we don't function like that. We're human beings. But balance is seeing that it's all one thing and that there's all these different pieces. And sometimes the pieces are going to be bigger depending on what's necessary in that moment. And sometimes they're going to be smaller, right? So sometimes work is going to take up more of that slice of that pie, right? Of your balance pie, right? That you're going to have a bigger slice in work because you have a deadline, you have a big project you're working on or whatever it is. And then it can get back to being a smaller piece, and maybe something shows up in your life like a health issue, right? Or something's going on with your child or with your parent or something, right? And that's going to need to take up more of your time and effort in that moment. And so it's this ever flowing shift and change within this pie, this sphere, that where your time and attention goes is going to always need to be adapted to the environment. But so balance to me is being able to understand what are the things that are important to you, what are the slices of your pie, right? Those values that you have and the things that get your time and attention, those are all different slices. And to understand that some are going to be bigger and some are going to be smaller, and to not add on things that are unnecessary.
I love that. I mean, it's really in alignment with how I personally have thought and like reframed balance for myself as well. And because I think similar to you in the past, it was like, okay, I have this like equal balance between things. And then what happens if situations are butting up against that definition of balance, then all of a sudden now we feel off, we feel wrong. Versus if we are thinking of balance in the sense of like how you're describing it, where it's like, we know there's different seasons where, we spend more time at work because there's a big thing. Or obviously I've been really open on the podcast about, I had a lot of health things in the fall. So it's like, well, hey, health is priority. Like my health in my family life has to have a bigger chunk of the pie compared to work. And then you start to see that flip. And I think when people have that permission, it's okay. One thing that I think it makes me think of, though, for people too, is needing to reassess that. Because I think sometimes what can happen is people can then all of a sudden they get stuck with like, now maybe they had a big project or something, and so now their balance for their work like takes up a huge chunk of the pie, and then it's a habit now, and they don't go back and revisit it.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said that, Julie, because it's so important to assess that pie, right? On a pretty regular basis, or if you have a better practice of it, of noticing, right? Like, okay, family and health is going to take more right now, and work is going to take less, but then work's going to take more. And the concept, and we said this very briefly in the very beginning, the concept of recovery, right? And after work has taken up, after that slice has taken up a lot of space, to then intentionally choose recovery and say, okay, I'm going to do less here do what I need to do, of course, but take a moment to also make sure that I'm taking care of my health and my wellness and spending time with my family, because work is going to pick up again. It always does, right? That roller coaster and that yin and yang, it's sometimes it's going to be a lot and sometimes it's going to be a little, but it's never not going to go back to being a lot. So intentionally choosing in those moments when it works, right, to say, I'm going to take some time, right? And to build in those moments of recovery, even when work is super busy, is so important in making sure that you stave off burnout as well, right? And so it's not just that there's a health issue or that burnout is on the horizon that you need to take time off or need to then spend some time with yourself or doing things that bring you joy, but rather it's built into the system, right? So even after you have these really busy days or these really big projects that you're working on, that amidst all of that, that you're taking time to do something that is not work related, that does fill your cup, that is spending time and energy in those other slices of your pie.
I'm so curious, and talking about like I love how you mentioned about it being like a system. Like you have a system, and I know that you're really big on the tools and the strategies. Like once you have a system, I feel like people really flounder when they feel like they don't have a system or like an organization system for your life. And so I'm hearing you say that there's like these key things, and it made me think like, Jenna, do you, knowing you run businesses, you're a speaker, you're an author, you're a coach, you do all these things, you're a parent, do you have these sort of non-negotiable things that even if, certain parts of the pie are taking up a lot of time, it doesn't matter the yin, the yang, the flow of what's taking time, like these are some core things that you're like, these have to stay?
Oh, 100%. 100%. One of those is exercise. That no matter what, I exercise Monday through Friday, 6:30 in the morning. I go and I have a routine of Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm at my gym Tuesday and Thursday. I do yoga. And that's non-negotiable for me unless I need to be on a plane somewhere, right? Otherwise, no matter where I go, where I am, I every morning wake up and do the exercise because that sets me up for my day. And when I was in my deep chaos and in my burnout, I didn't have that. And it was a slow, steady becoming of that being what it was, right? It started off really small. It started off only a couple of days a week. It started off at a different time of day. And slowly but surely, it got to be what the routine is now. And it is a non-negotiable. My kids know it. My husband knows it. Like if I'm not home in the morning when someone wakes up, they know where I am because I'm at the gym or I'm at the yoga studio. That's it. Like that is a huge non-negotiable for me. And another one, which is a little more lenient just because I have children and life, and 3 of them are teenagers, is sleep.
Yeah.
I'm very, very committed to my nighttime sleep and my routine of how I put myself, my mind and my body into a state so that it could have a deep, restful sleep.
I'm so curious, and I personally for myself, but also I just am curious, like, what do you do? Because this is something a lot of people, they want to start waking up earlier, and I have a morning routine. I love my morning routine. When it's off, I feel so off. Like I'm like, I don't even talk to anyone. Like it's so important to me. But when that bedtime, but I have struggled with the bedtime routine. And so I'm just so curious because you just mentioned like I have this thing that gets me into that state. Like, do you have a couple things you want to share with the listeners who are maybe like, what do you do to get yourself in a restful state? Because that, again, the sleep thing, like it sounds like such a simple thing, but that is a huge driver of burnout for people.
Yeah, it really
What do
is
you do?
because
Give us your sleep tips. How do you get
my
yourself
sleep
ready
tips.
for rest?
I've tried a lot of things over the years, and my current routine has been the winner for sure. So firstly, there's a red light bulb in my bedroom.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when pretty much I would say a couple hours before bedtime, I turn on the red light and I don't turn on the like overlights because I have a red light lamp and then there's like the light in
Yeah.
the room, right?
Yep.
So I put on the red light so that when I come into the room, visually, it's a space of calm.
Yeah.
And it's a space of where it's not bright, it's dim, and the body and mind are like, okay, it means it's time to settle down. right? Because when we see the bright lights, we think, oh, it's day,
So true. Yeah. I mean, it
right?
has a huge impact. Yeah.
Huge impact. So the red light being one that's a visual cue that helps everything start settling in,
Hmm.
right? Another is that after I've done my teeth and my face and all of that good stuff, I put my legs up against the wall. I lie down on the floor and I
Mm.
put my legs up against the wall. So I look so silly. I look
Mhm.
like my child who's like, "Yay!" Like my 8-year-old who's playing on the floor with his Legos or whatever, and then I have my
Yep.
legs up the wall, and for at least 10 minutes, because there's been so much research that has shown how helpful that is for calming the nervous system,
Mhm.
for aiding in digestion, for just calming the body and getting it into a state of slumber.
Mhm.
And so doing that as well is a big one for me. And while I'm down there, funny enough, there's a game on my phone I like to play. So I do that, and that, like, I don't know, it's funny, like whatever the rest of the goodies that are in my mind for the day, it kind of it releases it in this game. It's a word game. And so it just releases the rest of that, of my like mental stimulation,
Yep.
through the game while I have my legs up
Yeah.
on the wall. Um, and then I tend to read a few pages of a book and I do some stretching,
Mhm.
and sleepy time right into it.
See, I love that because it's like, I mean, everyone has their thing, right? For some people, it's like, oh, I can't do that or I can't do this, but having some routine where you're getting yourself ready. And this is something we've tried different things. It's so funny because I've done the thing where I lay down, put my legs on the wall, and I also have an 8-year-old. So he's like jumping on me. He's like, "What are we doing? Can I do it?" Because I had read it, but there's just like really good prompt for me to look at that again.
Hmm.
But even for like it's sleep habits we're trying to teach my son because he has a really hard time calming his brain down at
Hmm.
night, and then we can see the impact it has for him, if he's tired in the morning. And so I had gone to a spa recently and they had this like spa like bedtime routine. They had a little thing on your pillow with a little card and a bedtime spray and a bedtime chocolate with like some herbal thing in it. It's like, okay, step one, have your nighttime tea and then spray this.
Hmm.
So we actually started trying to implement like a little spa like thing. We would dim the lights, we put spa music on, and it's just, again, it's a system that you're creating, right? It's your bedtime system, your wake up system. And the more that you can stick to those systems, right? Okay, and then it's now when I go into my work day, I have my system.
Hmm.
I'm gonna take a walk. And some days, like you said, like we have kids, some days we can't do the bedtime routine, but we can get right back on it because it's come a habit. And I think that's the same thing when we think of the burnout to the balance, is creating those systems that become habits that even if something throws us off, we can come back home to it
Hmm.
when we need to.
Absolutely. It's so great to have those anchors, those
Yes.
anchor
Yeah, the
points.
anchors. I love that.
Right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Jenna, this was such a great conversation. There's so many ways we could take this, and I just appreciate you coming on and sharing these tips. If you could leave our listeners with just like one final thought around, this whole idea we've talked about, what would you want to share with them?
Oh, the one final thought is to start small, right? Small impact, 1% improvement is better than zero.
Hmm.
And that's what gets you going, right? Just making a tiny change, a tiny improvement is all you need to get the momentum started, right? Because even if we think about, like, if you want to start reading more, let's say, that if you read one page a day for a year, you're going to have read over 365 pages.
Hmm.
That's more than 0 pages that you would have read otherwise,
Hmm.
right? The impact of doing something like going for a 1 minute walk, getting up and doing a few jumping jacks between Zoom calls, right? Just get your blood flowing, even if it's in these micro ways, make substantial impact.
Yeah, so I love that tip. Just starting small, especially because we talk about multiple things, and then I think people can get overwhelmed. Like, I need a bedtime routine. I need to put my legs up on the wall, and I need to wake up at 6:30. It's like, no, pick your one thing. Because I always tell people, pick your
Mhm.
one thing from this conversation with Jenna, the one thing that you can start with, and then give yourself the momentum to keep going. So, Jenna, thank you so much. We're gonna make sure that we, drop all of the links for people to be able to connect with you, to find you, as well as the link to your books in the show notes so that people can check those out. And for those of you listening, make sure that you reach out to Jenna, let her know what stood out for you from this episode, and share this out and tag people, because this message can help so many people. Thank you so much, Jenna.
Thank you, Julie. Appreciate you so much.